Your food got 15% smaller, and they never told you. Your paycheck went up, and your life got worse. Your tap water has forever chemicals in it, and the government just made it legal to leave them there. And if you feel like something is deeply wrong in this country right now, I have the data that proves you are right. A peer-reviewed study from the University of Massachusetts Amherst found that the average packaged food product in America shrank by 14.6% over 7 years, and that shrinkage was hidden from the official inflation numbers, understating the real cost of your groceries by nearly 4 percentage points. Wages went up 21.8% since the pandemic, but prices went up 22.7%, which means after the biggest raises in a generation, you are still poorer than you were in 2020. The Environmental Working Group confirmed in March 2026 that 176 million Americans are drinking water contaminated with PFAS forever chemicals, and the EPA is rolling back the limits that were supposed to protect you. 82 million Americans told a West Health and Gallup survey that they have cut back on food or utilities to afford health care. 38% of people who have insurance are skipping care because they cannot afford the copay on the plan they are already paying for. And the researchers said that instability, financial, political, and personal, has become a defining feature of daily life for an entire generation. You have been told that the economy is strong, that inflation is coming down, that things are getting better. And every single time you hear that, a voice in the back of your head says that is not what my bank account looks like. That is not what my grocery bill looks like. That is not what my life feels like. And you have been wondering if maybe you are the problem. Maybe you are not budgeting well enough. Maybe you are not working hard enough. Maybe you are just not doing it right. You are not the problem. The system is the problem, and I can prove it. In the next 40 minutes, I am going to walk you through 10 things that are measurably, provably, documentably getting worse in your daily life right now. Not in the stock market, not in GDP, in your life, your food, your water, your paycheck, your health, your credit, your energy, your home, your future. They keep telling you things are fine when nothing about your life feels fine. It is because the people measuring the economy are not measuring your experience. They are measuring theirs. And for them, things are fine. For you, it is getting worse. Let us get into it. They are stealing from you at the grocery store, and you do not even know it. Okay, so I need to talk about something that is genuinely making me angry, and I think once you hear this, it is going to make you angry too. Because you know how everybody keeps saying that inflation is coming down, right? The politicians say it, the news anchors say it, they show you the charts and they point to the CPI and they go, look, inflation is at 2.4%, it is practically back to normal, everything is fine. And you are standing in the grocery store looking at a bag of chips that cost the same as it did last year, and you think, okay, I guess they are right, the price did not go up. But here is what they are not telling you. The bag got smaller. You are paying the same price for less product, and they are banking on you not noticing. It is called shrinkflation, and it is one of the most widespread and deliberately hidden scams in the American consumer economy right now. A peer-reviewed study published in the Informs journal Marketing Science in February 2026 confirmed that product downsizing occurs far more frequently than product upsizing, and that when package sizes shrink, consumers respond by purchasing additional units, which increases their overall spending. So the company gives you less, you subconsciously buy more to compensate, and you end up spending more money for the same amount of product. That is not inflation coming down, that is inflation being hidden from you. And a separate study from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, published in the International Journal of Industrial Organization in January 2026, found that between 2012 and 2019, the average size of packaged food in American grocery stores decreased by 14.6%. Let me say that again because I need you to really process it. Your food got almost 15% smaller over a 7-year stretch, and that shrinkage understated actual food inflation by 3.7 percentage points. Which means the inflation numbers you were being told during that entire period were essentially lying to you. They were measuring the price of the package, not the price of what was inside it. The US measuring the price of the package, not the price of what was inside it. Government Accountability Office, the GAO, looked into this and found that while shrinkflation added less than 0.1 percentage points to overall CPI, the impact on specific categories was far larger. Per-unit price increases among downsized products ranged from 12% for paper towels to 32% for coffee. 32%. Your coffee is a third more expensive per ounce, and the price on the shelf looks the same. That is not a market correction. That is a magic trick. And here is the part that really gets under my skin. The companies know that you are not going to notice. That is the entire strategy. A study cited by the marketing science researchers found that consumers are roughly twice as sensitive to price increases as they are to equivalent size reductions. So if Gatorade raises the price of their bottle by $1, people notice and they switch brands. But if Gatorade shrinks the bottle from 32 ounces to 28 ounces and keeps the price the same, most people do not even register it. And that is exactly what Gatorade did. By the way, that is a real example, and it is everywhere. Reese's party size miniatures went from 40 ounces down to 35.6. Pantene conditioner went from 12 fluid ounces to 10.4. Pedigree dog food went from a 50-pound bag to 44 pounds. Folgers coffee went from 51 ounces to 43.5. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has confirmed that snacks, candy, and household paper products have been the most impacted categories. And Consumer Affairs reported in January 2026 that shrinkflation has not slowed down at all. It has just gotten harder to spot. Brands have evolved their tactics. They are no longer just making the box smaller. They are redesigning the packaging entirely so you cannot compare it to the old version. They are changing formulas so the product is weaker and you use more of it per serving. They are restructuring multi-packs so the count looks the same but the individual units are smaller. They are hiding it behind the word new and improved when what they actually mean is less for more. And 82% of American consumers say they are concerned about shrinkflation according to a 2024 YouGov survey, up from 73% the year before. 61% told Statista they noticed smaller packaging for the same price in the prior 12 months. And a massive global survey from the Capgemini Research Institute covering 32 countries found that 64% of consumers consider shrinkflation unfair. But here is the kicker. Even when people notice it, even when they are angry about it, their purchasing behavior barely changes. The outrage cycles through social media for a news cycle, and then people go right back to buying the same products at the same prices in the smaller sizes. Because what choice do you have? You still need toilet paper. You still need coffee. You still need to feed your family. And the companies know that. They are not counting on your ignorance. They are counting on your dependence. And that right there is what it looks like when a system extracts wealth from the people at the bottom and moves it to the people at the top, while technically never raising the price. That is the trick. And you are paying for it every single time you walk through the checkout line. Alright, so let me ask you something, and I want you to really be honest with yourself here. Have you gotten a raise in the last couple of years? Maybe even a decent one. A lot of people have, right? The economy has been adding jobs, wages have been going up on paper, and if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, nominal wages, meaning the actual number on your paycheck, went up 21.8% from January 2021 to mid-2025. 21.8%, that sounds incredible. That sounds like the best wage growth in a generation, and it is, on paper. But here is the problem. During that same period, the Consumer Price Index, which measures the cost of the stuff you actually buy, rose 22.7%. So your paycheck went up 21.8, but your cost of living went up 22.7. Which means in real terms, after you account for inflation, your purchasing power actually declined by 0.7% over 4.5 years of supposedly historic wage growth. You got the biggest raises of your lifetime, and you are still poorer than you were when the pandemic started. That is not a feeling, that is math. And Bankrate, which tracks this with what they call their wage to inflation index, put it bluntly. They said Americans on average are earning 1.2 percentage points below the rise in the cost of living over the past 4 years. Prices went up 22.7%, and wages only went up 21.5% in their measurement. Which means the typical workers' pay increases have not yet caught up to higher prices. And they project that if current trends continue, wages will not fully catch back up to total post-pandemic inflation until the third quarter of 2026. So for 5.5 years, from 2021 through mid-2026, American workers have been running on a treadmill that is tilted against them, getting raises that feel good in the moment but do not actually cover the damage. And My Perfect Resume did an even deeper analysis that accounted for both inflation and local cost of living differences, and their finding was devastating. Once you adjust for everything, the typical American worker is earning about 2.6% less in real purchasing power than they were in 2020. In New Jersey, Rhode Island, Maryland, New York, and Massachusetts, real wages fell between 5 and 7%. Your paycheck got bigger, your life got worse. That is the reality for the majority of working Americans right now. And the people getting hit the hardest are exactly who you would expect. A Bankrate study found that educators had the biggest gap between income growth and inflation over the past 4 years. Teachers, the people we trust with our children's futures, are losing the most ground. And the federal minimum wage has been sitting at $7.25 an hour since 2009, 17 years. In that time, inflation has eroded its real value so dramatically that the Economic Policy Institute calculated that if the minimum wage had kept pace with productivity growth, it would be over $18 an hour today. Instead, it is $7.25. And CBS News reported that 3/4 of Americans say their incomes have not kept up with inflation. 75%. A supermajority of the country is telling you that their paychecks are not enough, and the response from policymakers is to point at the unemployment rate and say the economy is strong. But here is the thing that nobody on television wants to explain. The unemployment rate measures whether you have a job. It does not measure whether that job pays enough for you to live. It does not measure whether you had to take a second job to cover your rent. It does not measure whether your health insurance premium doubled. It does not measure whether your groceries got 15% smaller while the price stayed the same. It does not measure whether you have stopped saving for retirement because there is nothing left after the bills are paid. And that gap between the official story and the lived reality is where the frustration lives. An executive director at the Yale Budget Lab named Martha Gimbel said something that I think perfectly captures what people are feeling. She said a wage increase is something you earn, and inflation is something that happens to you. It feels unfair to people that their hard-earned wage increase is getting eaten up by something that is not their fault. And she is right. That is exactly what is happening. You did everything you were supposed to do, you showed up, you worked hard, you negotiated the raise, or you switched jobs for better pay. And it still was not enough, because the cost of being alive in this country rose faster than the reward for contributing to it. And 56% of Americans told Bankrate's Consumer Sentiment Survey that the economy is on the wrong track. Only 26% said it is on the right track. And you know what? The 56% are not wrong. They are not pessimistic. They are not uninformed. They are reading their bank statements. And their bank statements say that the raise was a mirage, and the treadmill is still tilted, and nobody in charge is reaching for the controls. Okay, I want you to think about something for a second. When was the last time you filled a glass of water from your kitchen tap and actually thought about what was in it? Probably never, right? You just turn it on, fill it up, and drink it. Because this is America, and we assume the water is safe. That assumption is wrong for over 176 million people right now, and it is about to get worse because of a decision the government just made. Let me explain. There is a class of synthetic chemicals called PFAS, which stands for per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and scientists call them forever chemicals because once they get into the environment or into your body, they do not break down. They just accumulate. And they are in everything. Non-stick cookware, waterproof clothing, firefighting foam, food packaging, cosmetics, dental floss, artificial turf. They have been manufactured and used since the 1940s, and they are now in the drinking water supply of the majority of the American population. In March 2026, the Environmental Working Group released updated data from the EPA's own testing program and confirmed that 176 million Americans are drinking tap water contaminated with PFAS. That is more than half the country. And the total number of known PFAS-contaminated sites in the United States has reached 9,728 across all 50 states. The U.S. Geological Survey conducted the first broad-scale study of PFAS in tap water from both public and private sources, and their estimate is even more alarming. Government estimates suggest as much as half of all U.S. households have some level of PFAS in their water, and these are not harmless trace chemicals. Very low doses of PFAS have been linked to suppression of the immune system, increased risk of kidney and testicular cancer, thyroid disease, elevated cholesterol, harm to fetal development, and reduced vaccine effectiveness in children. The GAO itself said that aside from lead, PFAS may be the most pervasive and potentially costly contaminant our water supplies have ever dealt with. And here is the part that should make you furious. In 2024, the Biden administration finalized the first-ever federal limits on 6 PFAS chemicals in drinking water. It was a historic rule, the first time in 28 years the EPA had set limits on an unregulated contaminant. And then the Trump administration rolled it back. The EPA announced plans to eliminate the limits on 4 of the 6 regulated PFAS chemicals, extend the compliance deadline from 2029 to 2031, and weaken the enforcement framework. The Environmental Working Group's acting chief science officer said the EPA's own data proves the known extent of PFAS contamination is getting worse, which makes the plan to weaken protections even more alarming. And if you think you are safe because you have a private well instead of city water, think again. An Associated Press investigation published in February 2026 found that the roughly 40 million Americans who get drinking water from private wells are at particular risk because the federal limits that do exist do not apply to them. At least 20 states do not even test private wells for PFAS outside of areas where contamination is already suspected. In Stella, Wisconsin, a woman named Kristen Hanneman agreed to let state scientists test her well. And months later, a toxicologist called and told her to stop drinking the water immediately. The PFAS levels in her family's well were thousands of times higher than federal limits. Her children had been drinking it for years, and the chemicals were everywhere in the area. The fish in the lakes, the deer in the woods, all of it contaminated. And because PFAS cannot be removed by boiling or standard filtration, the only options are expensive reverse osmosis systems, drilling deeper wells, or connecting to city water, all of which cost thousands of dollars that most families do not have. Some are just buying bottled water indefinitely, which is not even guaranteed to be safe, because PFAS is not regulated in bottled water either. And here is the detail that ties it all together. EWG estimates that nearly 30,000 industrial polluters could be discharging PFAS into the environment right now, including into sources of drinking water. And 77% of the public water system managers surveyed by the GAO said they have not yet fully implemented a PFAS treatment method. Most of them said they need more information and more money from the EPA. And the small systems, the rural communities, the homeowners associations with 5 people on staff, they told the GAO that adding PFAS testing and mitigation would be financially crippling. One survey respondent said our resources are extremely finite as it is, so the contamination is confirmed. The health risks are documented, the treatment technology exists but is not deployed. The federal protections that were put in place are being weakened, and the people who created the contamination, the chemical companies, the military bases, the industrial polluters, are not the ones paying for the cleanup. You are. Or you are just drinking it and hoping for the best. That is the state of tap water in the richest country on earth in 2026. You are not imagining it. It is getting worse. And the people who are supposed to protect you just decided to stop trying. You are one medical bill away from financial ruin, and you do not even have to be uninsured. I want to tell you about a woman named Sheila Nesbitt who recently retired after a long career as a librarian in the Chicago suburb of Park Forest. She has Medicare. She is not uninsured. She played by every rule this country ever set for her. And she told CNN that she sometimes skips lunch and does not always take her medications for cholesterol, asthma, and high blood pressure to save money. She lowered the thermostat in her house and puts on a sweater and huddles under 2 blankets to stay warm because she cannot afford to heat her home and pay her medical bills at the same time. Her exact words were, "I never thought I would be living like this." And she is not an outlier. Guys, she is the new normal. A West Health and Gallup survey of nearly 20,000 adults published in March 2026 found that more than 82 million Americans have had to cut back on at least one daily living expense to cover their healthcare bills. 82 million people in the richest country on earth are choosing between food and medicine, between heating their home and seeing a doctor. 15% are rationing or not following prescribed medication. 15% are borrowing money to pay for care. Others are cutting back on meals and utilities. And those are the people who have insurance. That is the insane part. This is not just an uninsured person's problem. A medical economic survey published in March 2026 found that 38% of insured adults delayed or skipped care due to cost, a 41% increase over the 27% who said the same thing in 2023. And among those who put off care, 42% said their condition got worse because they waited. So you have insurance, you pay your premiums, and you still cannot afford to use it. And when you finally go to the doctor because you have no choice, the condition that could have been treated cheaply 3 months ago has now become an emergency that costs 10 times as much. That is the healthcare system in America in 2026. It is not a system that keeps you healthy. It is a system that waits for you to get desperate enough to pay whatever they are charging. And the KFF polling data makes it even clearer how deep this goes. Their January 2026 health tracking poll found that healthcare is the #1 household cost worry in America. Not food, not housing, not gas, healthcare. 2/3 of adults, 66%, say they are at least somewhat worried about being able to afford the cost of healthcare for their families. That is higher than the share worried about affording food at 57%, utilities at 57%, housing at 52%, and gas at 52%. Healthcare costs have overtaken every other expense in the hierarchy of American financial anxiety. And 1/3 of adults, 36%, say they have skipped or postponed getting needed healthcare in the past 12 months because of the cost. Not elective procedures, not cosmetic work, needed care. Things they actually required and deliberately avoided because the price tag was too high. And the Nationwide Retirement Institute found that 41% of insured Americans have skipped healthcare appointments due to rising costs in the past year. Nearly one-third, 31%, say they cannot afford to pay an unexpected $500 out-of-pocket medical bill. And Americans are postponing or canceling routine preventive care, the exact kind of care that catches problems early before they become catastrophic. They are skipping annual physicals, skipping mammograms, skipping colonoscopies, skipping dental cleanings. And the NBC News and West Health Gallup survey from November 2025 found that 47% of adults were worried they would not be able to afford health care in 2026, the highest level since tracking began in 2021. The share of adults saying healthcare costs cause a lot of stress in their daily lives has nearly doubled since 2022, from 8% to 15%, and 78% of Americans have postponed at least one major life decision because of healthcare costs. 26% have delayed surgical or medical treatment. 14% have delayed buying a home. 9% have postponed retirement. 6% have put off having or adopting a child. Think about that. People are choosing not to have children because they cannot afford the health care that goes with it. They are staying in jobs they hate because they need the insurance. They are not retiring even though their bodies are breaking down because they cannot afford coverage outside of employment. Healthcare in America is not a safety net. It is a trap. It is a system that holds your entire life hostage and charges you the maximum the market will bear for the privilege of staying alive. And you are not imagining that it is getting worse. The data says it is worse than it has ever been measured to be. And the ACA subsidies that kept premiums manageable for 22 million people expired because Congress could not get its act together during a government shutdown. And now premiums are up 22% in a single year, and millions of people are making the same calculation Sheila Nesbitt is making in Park Forest, Illinois. Do I take my medication, or do I eat today? That is not a rhetorical question in America anymore. It is a daily decision for tens of millions of your neighbors. Number 6. Your credit score is falling, and the system is designed to punish you for it. Alright, so let me talk to you about something that is not getting nearly enough attention right now, and it is going to affect millions of people in ways they do not see coming. Credit scores in America are starting to slide, and I know what you are thinking, like, okay, credit scores go up and down, what is the big deal? The big deal is what is causing it, how fast it is happening, and what it means for your ability to borrow, to rent, to insure, and to function in an economy that literally runs on your credit number. The average FICO score in America just fell to 714. Now on the surface that still sounds decent, right? But the direction matters more than the number, and the drop is being driven by two things that are hitting millions of people at the same time. The first is student loan payments. When the pandemic-era pause ended and payment requirements fully resumed, a massive wave of delinquencies hit. About one-third of federal student loan borrowers, 7.1 million people, saw new delinquencies on their credit reports, and the average credit score among those borrowers dropped by 62 points since the beginning of 2025. 62 points, guys. Think about that for a second. If you had a 720 before, you are down to 658 now. That takes you from prime borrowing territory, where you get the best rates on everything, to subprime territory, where you pay more for every single financial product you touch. Your mortgage rate goes up, your car loan rate goes up, your credit card APR goes up, your insurance premiums go up in states that use credit-based pricing, which is most of them. One number drops by 62 points, and suddenly every monthly payment in your life gets more expensive. That is not a minor fluctuation. That is a financial earthquake for 7 million people. And the second driver is credit card debt. Americans now owe $1.28 trillion on credit cards, the highest balance ever recorded. The average individual balance hit $6,580, and TransUnion data shows that the median utilization rate for subprime borrowers has reached 99.2%. That means the people who can least afford to carry debt are maxed out. There is no cushion. There is no emergency reserve. One unexpected expense and the whole thing collapses. And here is the thing that makes this a self-reinforcing trap and not just a temporary dip. When your credit score drops, your cost of borrowing goes up. When your cost of borrowing goes up, you pay more in interest. When you pay more in interest, you have less money for your actual bills. When you have less money for your actual bills, you miss payments or make minimums. When you miss payments, your credit score drops further, and the cycle accelerates. It is a financial death spiral, and it is hitting the people who are already the most stretched. Gen Z is getting hammered the hardest. The share of Gen Z borrowers who have seen major credit score drops went from 11% to 14%. They are also opening more credit cards than any other demographic group, not because they want to, but because they have no other way to cover the gap between what they earn and what things cost. And at the same time, 48% of Americans still have a credit score of 750 or above, which is actually a record high. So you have this K-shaped pattern, right? One group is doing great, the other group is sliding. The top half has never had it better. The bottom half has never been more exposed. And the data on buy now, pay later is making it worse. Those BNPL loans are now being added to credit reports, which means that the informal lending that millions of people were using to survive without it showing up on their record is now being counted. And for a lot of people, that added visibility is dragging their scores down because they were using BNPL as a lifeline, not a luxury. It was the thing between them and not being able to buy groceries or pay a utility bill. And now it is being weaponized against their creditworthiness. And 83% of Americans told a recent survey that improving their credit is now a priority, which tells you that the majority of the country knows they are in trouble. 11 million Americans carry credit card debt. Credit card interest rates are averaging over 22%, and banks have increased their profit margins on credit card lending by 109% since the 2008 crisis. So your score goes down, your rates go up, the bank makes more money, and you have less. That is not a bug in the system. That is the system. And you are not imagining that it is getting harder to keep your head above water financially. The credit score data proves it. The delinquency data proves it. The utilization data proves it. And the people profiting from the trap have zero incentive to change it because your distress is their quarterly earnings. You are working yourself into the ground, and it is not even getting you ahead. Here is something I have been thinking about a lot lately, and I bet you have too, even if you have not put it into words yet. You are exhausted. Not the normal kind of tired where you had a long week and need a weekend to recover. I mean the deep structural exhaustion that does not go away with a vacation, because the thing causing it is the shape of your entire life. And the data on this is so bad that it should be a national emergency. But instead, we treat it like a personality flaw. Like if you are burned out, that is your problem, you need to meditate more, or set better boundaries, or whatever, and the numbers say otherwise. According to Mindshare Partners' 2025 Workplace Mental Health Report, 76% of American workers reported experiencing some level of burnout. 76%, 3 out of 4 workers, and 53% reported moderate to severe levels. More than half the workforce is not just tired, they are functionally damaged by their work. And Moodle's 2025 survey found that 66% of U.S. employees report feeling burnout in some form, with 19% saying they are taking on too much work because of labor shortages in their industry. So the companies laid people off, gave the remaining workers the workload of 2 or 3 people, and then wonder why everybody is falling apart. And here is the thing that really gets me. A 2025 study from Sweden actually quantified the long-term economic damage of burnout and found that 2 years after a clinical burnout diagnosis, individuals suffered a permanent 12.36% earnings loss. Permanent, not temporary. Your burnout does not just cost you your health and your weekends. It costs you over 12% of your future income for the rest of your career. The researchers called it economic scarring. And the World Health Organization classified burnout as an occupational phenomenon, meaning it starts at work, it is caused by work, and the responsibility for it belongs to the workplace, not to the individual. But in America, we do not treat it that way. We treat it as an individual failure. You should have set better boundaries. You should have found a less stressful job. You should have just worked harder so you could earn enough to not need to work so hard. That is the circular logic of a system that has confused survival with productivity and exhaustion with dedication. And the numbers on what burnout is actually costing the economy are staggering. The World Health Organization estimates that burnout costs businesses $322 billion annually in lost productivity. $322 billion. And healthcare costs related to workplace burnout range from $125 billion to $190 billion per year. But here is the part nobody is connecting to everything else in this video. Burned out employees are 63% more likely to take a sick day. They are 23% more likely to visit the emergency room. They show 18 to 20% lower productivity. Their engagement levels drop by a third. And here is the one that ties it to the healthcare section. When you are burned out and your employer-sponsored health insurance has a $5,000 deductible and your copays keep climbing, you do not go to the doctor for the stress headaches or the chest pain or the insomnia or the digestive problems that burnout is causing. You just push through. You self-medicate with alcohol or caffeine or whatever gets you through the next shift. And then when something finally breaks, you end up in the emergency room with a $13,000 bill that your 22% credit card becomes the backstop for. And your credit score drops, and your borrowing costs go up. And the cycle we talked about in Section 6 accelerates. It is all connected, guys. The burnout feeds the healthcare crisis. The healthcare crisis feeds the debt crisis. The debt crisis feeds the credit crisis. And the credit crisis makes everything more expensive, which forces you to work harder, which makes the burnout worse. 1 in 4 employees are working outside their scheduled hours most of the time or every day, according to Mindshare Partners. And Deloitte's 2025 Workforce Intelligence Report found that mental fatigue and cognitive strain have surpassed workload volume as the primary drivers of burnout for the first time. It is no longer about how many hours you work. It is about the relentless, never-ending cognitive pressure of being always available, always responsive, always performing in an economy that demands more from you every year and pays you, as we covered in Section 9, roughly the same in real terms as it did when your parents were your age. And meanwhile, Gen Z and millennials are hitting peak burnout at 25 years old, which is 17 years earlier than the average American. They have not even started their careers, and they are already running on fumes. You are not imagining that you are more tired than you should be. The data says you are and the system that is exhausting you is profiting from your exhaustion, while telling you the problem is that you need a better morning routine. Owning a home has gone from difficult to mathematically impossible for an entire generation. I need you to hear this number because I do not think anyone is saying it loud enough. A national survey from IPX 1031 published in February 2026 found that 62% of Americans feel buying a home this year is unrealistic. 62%, that is up from 49% just 1 year ago. In 12 months, the share of people who feel locked out of homeownership jumped 13 points. And when you break it down by generation, 82% of Gen Z and 62% of millennials say they cannot afford to buy a home. 82% of an entire generation has looked at the housing market and concluded that it is not for them, and only 24% of Americans even plan to purchase a home in 2026 because the rest are in what the researchers call a holding pattern. They are waiting for rates to drop, waiting for prices to fall, waiting for their income to catch up, waiting for something to change. But nothing is changing in the right direction. The median home sale price in America is now over $400,000. Redfin's data shows home prices are about 40% higher than before the pandemic. The average first-time homebuyer needs an annual income of at least $126,700 just to afford the monthly payment, and the median household income is roughly $80,000. So the math does not work for the average family. It is not close to working, and mortgage rates are stuck between 6 and 7%. A far cry from the 2.6% lows in 2021, when millions of homeowners locked in their rates. Those homeowners are not selling, because why would they give up a 3% mortgage for a 6.5% one? One housing executive calculated that a $400,000 mortgage at 3% gives you a monthly payment of $1,686. The same mortgage at 6.5% is $2,528. That is a 50% increase for the exact same house. So the supply is locked, the demand is enormous, the prices are at record highs, and the one generation that is supposed to be in their prime home buying years has essentially been told to sit down and wait. And here is the generational data that should end every argument about whether young people are just not working hard enough. Redfin tracked homeownership rates by generation and found that only 26.1% of Gen Z adults owned a home in 2024, essentially flat from 2023 and 2022. The upward momentum that had been building since 2017 has completely stalled. For millennials, the rate is 54.9%, also flat. Meanwhile, Gen X is at 72.9%, and baby boomers are at nearly 80%, both still climbing. So the older you are, the more likely you are to own a home, and the younger you are, the more likely you are to be locked out. And when you compare the same ages across generations, the gap is even more damning. At age 27, only 32.6% of Gen Z owns a home compared to 38.4% of Gen X and 40.5% of boomers at that same age. At age 35, only 56% of millennials own their home versus 59.4% of Gen X and 61.5% of boomers when they were 35. Every generation is falling further behind the one before it at the exact same point in their lives. And the average age of the first-time homebuyer has reached a historic high of 38 years old, according to data cited by the America First Policy Institute. It used to be 29 in 1980, so in 45 years, it now takes Americans 9 additional years to reach the same milestone their parents reached almost a decade earlier. And 1 in 3 Gen Z adults still lives with their parents because they cannot afford to move out. And 84% of Gen Z say they are delaying major life milestones, like getting married or having children, specifically to try to save enough for a home. And research shows that housing costs are responsible for over half of the decline in the American fertility rate during the 2000s and 2010. People are not having children because they cannot afford the house they would raise them in. And by 2050, if the current trajectory continues, the median home could cost 8.4 times the median household income, according to projections compiled by BYU researchers. The Moody's chief economist Mark Zandi told Fortune that homeownership is about more deep-seated feelings around the economy, especially for younger people. He said if they cannot afford to buy a home, it undermines their general thinking about everything else, their job, their pay, their net worth. And he is right. Because when you take homeownership off the table for an entire generation, you are not just taking away a building. You are taking away the primary wealth-building mechanism that the middle class has relied on for 80 years. For 60% of middle-class Americans, their home is the bulk of their wealth. If you cannot buy one, you cannot build wealth. If you cannot build wealth, you cannot retire. If you cannot retire, you work until you die. That is not a housing market. That is a generational trap. And you are not imagining that it is getting harder. It is getting harder at the fastest pace ever measured. They keep telling you the economy is strong and your empty wallet proves they are lying. Let me tell you what drives me absolutely insane about the way the economy gets covered in this country. Every single month, someone stands at a podium or sits behind a news desk and reads a number and tells you things are getting better. Unemployment is low, GDP is growing. The stock market hit a record high, consumer spending is strong, and then you go home and you open your mail and there is a letter from your health insurance company saying your premium is going up 22%. And you open your fridge and there is less food in it than there was 5 years ago because your grocery bill went up 30% while your pay went up maybe 4%. And you check your bank account and there is $11 left before payday because your car insurance went up 60% and your childcare is eating 20% of your income and your credit card balance is climbing every month because you cannot cover the gap between what you earn and what things cost. And you sit there wondering, am I crazy? Because the TV says everything is fine, but everything in my actual life is getting worse. You are not crazy. The metrics they use to tell you the economy is healthy are not measuring your life. They are measuring the economy. And those are two entirely different things. GDP measures total output, the size of the pie, but it tells you nothing about who gets a slice. When a billionaire makes another $10 billion, that shows up in GDP growth. When a pharmaceutical company raises the price of insulin by 300%, the resulting spending shows up as consumer activity. When an insurance company collects premiums that doubled while denying half the claims, that is revenue, that is GDP, that is economic health. For them, unemployment measures whether you have a job. It does not measure whether that job pays your bills. It does not count the 80 million Americans working side hustles, because one job is not enough. It does not count the person working 60 hours across 2 jobs who is technically employed twice and still cannot afford groceries. And the stock market is not your retirement account. It is not your savings. It is a scoreboard for people who own enough assets to play the game. The top 10% of Americans own 93% of all stocks. When the S&P hits a record high, that is a headline for them and a number that means nothing for you. And the way the government measures inflation is part of the problem too. As we covered in Section 10, the CPI does not fully account for shrinkflation. A UMass Amherst study found that packaged food shrank 14.6% between 2012 and 2019, and that shrinkage understated food inflation by 3.7 percentage points. So when they told you food inflation was 2%, the real experience at the checkout line was closer to 6%. And the CPI weights things like electronics, which have gotten cheaper, alongside things like housing, healthcare, and food, which have exploded. So the average looks manageable even though the stuff you cannot live without is getting dramatically more expensive. And Bankrate's wage to inflation index, which we talked about in Section 9, shows that wages have still not caught up to post-pandemic price increases. Prices rose 22.7% since 2021. Wages rose 21.5%. The gap is small on paper but enormous in a monthly budget. It is the difference between having an emergency fund and being one flat tire away from a credit card spiral. And here is the thing that makes this section the most important one I have done so far. The disconnect between what the official metrics say and what people actually feel is not just frustrating, it is dangerous. Because when the government tells you the economy is strong and your lived experience says otherwise, one of two things happens. Either you stop trusting yourself, you internalize it, you think there is something wrong with you for struggling in a supposedly great economy, which feeds the anxiety and depression and loneliness epidemic that the Surgeon General has declared. Or you stop trusting the system entirely, which feeds the political radicalization and the institutional distrust and the conspiracy thinking that is tearing the country apart. Both outcomes are destructive, and both are being caused by the same thing. A set of economic metrics that were designed in the 1930s and 1940s to measure industrial output and have not been meaningfully updated to reflect the reality of how Americans actually live in 2026. The economy is strong, your paycheck is not, your grocery cart is shrinking, your insurance is doubling, your water has forever chemicals, your credit score is falling, your children cannot afford homes. You are one medical bill away from bankruptcy. And the only people who think this is fine are the people for whom the system was designed. You are not imagining it. It is getting worse. And the hardest part is that the people with the power to fix it have a financial incentive not to. An entire generation has stopped believing the system will ever work for them. I want to talk about something that is happening right now in this country that I think is more dangerous than any of the financial data I have shown you in this video. And it is not about money. It is about belief. It is about what happens when an entire generation of young Americans looks at the system they were born into and concludes, with evidence, that it was never designed to work for them. The Harvard Institute of Politics published their 51st youth poll in December 2025, surveying thousands of Americans aged 18 to 29, and the headline finding was not about who they are going to vote for or which party they prefer. The headline finding was that instability, financial, political, and interpersonal, has become a defining feature of daily life for young Americans. Only 13% said they believe the country is headed in the right direction. 13%, that is not pessimism. That is a generation that has looked at the data, the same data I have been showing you in this video, and drawn the only logical conclusion: the system is not working. And trust in institutions continues to erode across the board, with mainstream media, political parties, and core institutions viewed not as sources of stability, but as threats to their well-being. The Harvard poll director John Della Volpe described it as a generation raised through crisis after crisis that is now openly questioning whether American democracy and the economy can deliver for them at all, and Fortune coined a term for it. They called it disillusionomics. A writer and researcher named Kyla Lassman told Fortune she developed the concept after sitting with the broad trends she was seeing in Gen Z behavior and realizing that a single underlying force was connecting all of them. Disillusionment. Not laziness, not entitlement. Disillusionment, based on evidence. 1/3 of Gen Z says they believe they will never own a home. Many are planning to forego having children entirely. The unemployment rate for 16 to 24-year-olds reached 10.8% last year, more than double the overall rate of 4.3%. And familiar markers of stability, homeownership, family, retirement, feel unattainable to the majority of young Americans. They are not rejecting the American dream because they do not want it. They are rejecting it because they have done the math and concluded that it does not exist for them. And the Johns Hopkins SNF Agora Institute published a major report in February 2026 based on a nationally representative survey of 4,500 Americans across all generations, and their finding was devastating. Younger Americans express less trust in democratic institutions, weaker attachment to political parties, and greater skepticism about how the political system works than any older generation. And this is not partisan. It held true across both major parties. In both the Republican and Democratic parties, younger respondents feel less represented by party leaders and lack confidence that existing party structures reflect their views. They describe Democrats as weak and Republicans as corrupt. Only 16% offered a positive word for Democrats and 17% for Republicans. The researchers said younger generations have really only experienced a political system characterized by intense polarization and dysfunction. That is all they know. They have never seen a government that functioned effectively in their lifetime. And here is the part that should genuinely alarm you. A meaningful minority of young Americans expressed conditional openness to political violence, and the researchers linked this not to ideology but to financial strain, institutional distrust, and social alienation. When people feel like the system will never serve them, when they feel economically trapped and politically invisible, some of them start looking for exits that do not involve voting. And the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace published research in January 2026, warning that the retrenchment of federal social protection programs in the United States threatens to erode institutional trust, intensify polarization, and destabilize communities. They said social transfers are a visible expression of government legitimacy. When benefits are reduced and eligibility is tightened, citizens begin to question whether their government can uphold its side of the social contract. And the World Economic Forum named youth disillusionment as one of the largest global risks, defining it as disengagement and lack of confidence and loss of trust with existing economic, political, and social structures at a global scale. This is not an American problem. But it is worse here because the promise was bigger here. No country on earth sold the dream harder than we did, and no generation is more aware of the gap between the promise and the reality than the one that is living through it right now. You were right all along, it is getting worse. And they knew. So let me bring this all the way home. Because if you have watched this entire video, you have now seen the data on 10 different dimensions of daily life in America, and every single one of them points in the same direction. Your groceries cost more, and you are getting less because companies shrunk the products by 14.6% and hid the inflation inside the packaging. Your paycheck went up, but your purchasing power went down because prices outpaced wages by 1.2 percentage points over 4 years, and the gap still has not closed. Your tap water is contaminated with forever chemicals in over 9,700 sites across all 50 states, and the government just rolled back the protections that were supposed to address it. You are one medical bill from financial ruin, because 82 million Americans are cutting back on food and utilities to cover healthcare costs, and 38% of insured adults are skipping care they need because they cannot afford the copay on the insurance they are already paying for. Your credit score is falling because 7 million student loan borrowers saw a 62-point average drop, and your credit card is maxed at 22% interest while the bank's pocket record profits. You are burned out because 76% of the workforce reports it, and the system has confused your exhaustion with dedication. You cannot buy a home because 62% of Americans say it is unrealistic, and the average first-time buyer age has been pushed from 29 to 38. And the metrics they use to tell you the economy is fine are measuring a version of the economy that does not include your life. Every single one of those things is backed by peer-reviewed research, federal data, or polling from the most respected institutions in the country. This is not a feeling. It is a conclusion drawn from evidence. You were right. It is getting worse. And here is the part that makes this section the hardest one I have ever written. They knew. The people running the system knew every single thing I just told you, and they have known for years. The USDA knew food was shrinking, and published the data in government reports that nobody reads. The EPA knew the water was contaminated and set limits, and then weakened them under political pressure. The Federal Reserve knew wages were not keeping up, and published the charts showing the gap. The CBO knew the debt trajectory was unsustainable and projected it year after year while Congress ignored every warning. The Surgeon General knew loneliness was killing people and declared an epidemic that generated a news cycle and then disappeared. Harvard knew that upward mobility had collapsed from 92% to 50% and published it in the journal Science, and nothing changed. The housing data has been public for years. The healthcare data has been public for years. The credit data, the burnout data, the trust data, all of it has been public, peer-reviewed, confirmed, and available to every policymaker in Washington. And they did not act. Not because they did not know, but because acting would require confronting the people who benefit from the system staying exactly the way it is. The insurance companies that profit from your premiums going up. The pharmaceutical companies that profit from your medication being unaffordable. The banks that profit from your credit card interest. The food manufacturers that profit from selling you less for more. The landlords and real estate investors that profit from housing being out of reach. The employers that profit from your exhaustion and your fear of losing your job. Every crisis in this video has a beneficiary, and the beneficiaries have lobbyists, and the lobbyists have access to the people who write the laws, and the people who write the laws have decided through their actions, if not their words, that the beneficiaries matter more than you do. That is not a conspiracy, that is a business model. And it runs on your silence, your exhaustion, and your willingness to blame yourself for a system that was not designed for your benefit. So when someone tells you the economy is strong, you now know what to say. You say strong for whom? When someone tells you inflation is under control, you say the CPI does not count the 14.6% shrinkage in my groceries. When someone tells you to work harder, you say 76% of us are already burned out, and the data shows working harder is not closing the gap. When someone tells you young people just do not want to work, you say the Harvard Youth Poll found that only 13% of them believe the country is headed in the right direction, and maybe that is not laziness. Maybe that is evidence-based despair. You are not imagining it. It is getting worse. And the most important thing you can do right now is stop accepting the narrative that the problem is you. The problem is a system that has prioritized shareholder value over human value, quarterly earnings over generational stability, and political convenience over structural reform. And the only thing that has ever changed a system like that is enough people seeing it clearly at the same time and refusing to stay quiet about it. This video is my contribution to that. If it described your life, if it said the thing you have been feeling but could not prove, send it to someone who needs to hear it. Not to scare them, to arm them, because information without action is just anxiety. But information with action is the beginning of something they cannot ignore.